Welcome to the second ever edition of Pregame at the Dog Pound. It is Friday the 13th and the start of Week 3 of IHSA football as your 1-1 Riverside Brookfield Bulldogs will look to get back into the win column with a win tonight against a confident 2-0 Ridgewood Rebels team. I'm Liam Hickey, joined by RBHS royalty, homecoming king Hickey and Keohane. And before we start talking football, any thoughts on being given such an honor?
I mean, yeah, it's truly an honor. I didn't really, run a campaign, try to be in the running. But once I was in the running, I knew I wanted to win.
Well,
obviously, great group of royalty. Everyone's great people. It's a great feeling to win.
Well deserved, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Love having you on as a host. We'll start with a recap of RB's past couple games, and we'll start with also a recap of Ridgewood's past couple games as we do a recap of both of their schedules, and then we'll look into further on in their schedule as they play later opponents. So we'll start with RB in their first game against Niles West. A lot of positives to be taken away from that game, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Wouldn't you say, Liam?
Yeah, of course, on that defensive side, we destroyed Niles West when they were on offense. We had 3 interceptions in total. Warren Mason had 2. Max Strong had 1. Max Strong took his to the crib, and Warren Mason took 1 of his to the crib. It was a defensive showing from the Bulldogs.
Absolutely, and they certainly brought a lot of pressure to John Rhodes, the senior quarterback for Niles West.
Yeah.
He looked completely uncomfortable, looked stiff, did not want to be there as he looked just not natural in the pocket at all. One thing that they needed to shore up, I believe, was their run defense, which they definitely fixed. Excuse us as the band is going on right in front of us. But they definitely fixed their run defense in the second half as it was a little bit shaky in the first.
Yeah. And let's move on to the offense here now. One of the big positives we saw was moving our offense around. As we saw almost every single play, just about every play, we had Jacob Ratana line up behind Giancarlo Garcia and then get moved to either his left or his right. This allows Garcia to see whether Niles West was running a zone or man defense. This lets him know whether to give the ball on the jet sweep, maybe to keep it, or maybe give it to Ratana.
Absolutely, and another thing they did extremely well was utilizing their transfer wide receiver, Xavier Morozic de Jesus, who had 3 receptions for 77 yards in that game, including 1 touchdown with a 38-yard long catch. So great utilization of him as wide receiver.
Yeah, another great utilization that I loved seeing was Jaden Karras in the Wildcat. We saw that towards the end of the first half, end of the second quarter. It was the last drive. There was a little mishap there. Jaden Karras did fumble one of the snaps. Didn't really look like he was ready for it. But honestly, that is always on him. Snap was good. But that's something I love to see, a little mix-up for the Dogs.
Yeah, it was great to see how Coach Styler really invented a scheme surrounded around Karras and utilizing his speed there. He probably is RB's most complete skill player in terms of having the best rushing and receiving capabilities on both ends of the ball. I'd like to see continuation of that pre-play motion, like you mentioned. They need to run more of this, use their speedy wideouts such as Morozic de Jesus and Karras if they want to win tonight.
Yeah, one of the Bulldogs' identity is clearly speed. You have Ratana in the backfield. I think he runs a 4.445. It's a speedy running back, something that you love to see. And then you got Morozic de Jesus when he gets speed, kind of like a Tyreek Hill kind of player. They run him in motion. They can get him running a route. He's open almost every time.
And another player that we'll see in their wide receiver room that didn't play a lot at the start of the season but probably will play more tonight is Nico Caputo. Going back to Jaden Karras, he did not receive any touches receiving the ball against Hinsdale South as Nico Caputo took all of them as a sophomore. He's currently second in receiving yards on the team with 27.5 on the season. Yeah. I think we should look for him tonight to maybe take Karras' spot a little bit catching-wise.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move into that Hinsdale South game. RB, that was kind of a rude awakening for the Dogs. We came into Hinsdale positive. We had momentum going from our last big win, but we were shut down.
Yeah, they got absolutely boat raced, unfortunately. Got outbeaten every single stat. Total yards, RB only had 251 compared to Hinsdale South's 476. They allowed Hinsdale South to have 201 passing yards compared to RB's meek 120. And Hinsdale South, their most dominant part of all, they had 275 yards on the ground, while RB only had 131.
Yeah, but honestly, something that was good to see was our run game going up. The one problem I have with that is Giancarlo Garcia accounted for 91 of the yards, which is not what we want to see. We want to have Giancarlo Garcia to be able to stay in the pocket and look for his speedy receivers down the field.
Yeah, it was proving that Jacob Bertano was ineffective that game. They had to resort to using Damian Renteria, who was really effective when he did have the ball, but that was only on a few carries. He only had 2 attempts, going for 30 yards, averaging 15 yards per carry on that game. But overall, bad display of offense from that RB team last week.
Yeah, for sure. And just like one thing I want to add on to what I said is to keep Garcia throwing the ball. He rushed 15 times, right? But he also fumbled 3 times while running. That's another reason we have to keep him in the air.
Absolutely, and they proved to be successful in the air. Marosa DeJesus, going back to him, he had 5 receptions for 78 yards in that game with a long of 42-yard completion. He actually, although Garcia may have gotten some critiques from that game, he had a few dots, especially in that second half once he started to get more comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that we love to see is Garcia getting comfortable. It has clearly taken him a little bit into the game to start getting comfortable, but when he's comfortable, he's a dangerous quarterback. Like we said earlier, Nico Caputo, little coming out game for Nico Caputo. 4 receptions, 33 yards, and a long of 25 yards. That's a guy I'd love to see in this offense more.
It's partially understandable why Garcia is uncomfortable, considering he is a first-time varsity starter, similar to Ridgewood's situation, who their quarterback right now is a sophomore quarterback as well, Angelo Vital, coming into a new situation as quarterback where he used to only play baseball in the past. And with that, we'll move on to Ridgewood's past 2 games, starting with their absolute rinse against Schurz, a Chicago public school.
Yeah, that game was a blowout. 54-12 win for Ridgewood. Obviously, we know that these CPS schools aren't the strongest schools in the football column, but Ridgewood took advantage of that. Angelo Vital, in his first game as a quarterback, 13 for 16 for 274 yards, and he threw for 4 touchdowns, only accounting for 1 pick.
And their run game was on fire as well. Frank Horak, their #1 running back, had 8 attempts for 74 yards, notching 2 touchdowns in the process as well. Nico Camilo, another running back, had 11 attempts for 70 yards, also had 1 touchdown. They had so many people just stat padding in that game.
Yeah, if we want to talk about stat padding, let's head over to Luke Melendez. 4 receptions, 80 yards, 1 touchdown. While that alone may seem pretty impressive, let's go to his defensive side of the ball. 4 interception game to open up his season.
4 interceptions, which actually leads the state of Illinois. Talk about stat padding there. Absolutely undeserved, in my opinion, when you're going against schools like Schurz compared to schools like Lincoln Way East that are playing actually good opponents.
Yeah, I completely agree. The Schurz quarterback had 1 awful game. Threw 10. Not a quarterback that deserves to be behind the center.
Might be time to hang up the cleats after that.
Might be time to retire that football program.
Yes.
But let's move on to another receiver here before we head into their next game. Let's talk about Alex Rabchek. He had 2 receptions, 52 yards, and had 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, he's another dynamic guy. He's a junior. Season currently with 3 touchdowns total. We know he had 2 touchdowns in that game, and he also had another touchdown in the game following that. And he's averaging 13.8 yards per reception currently. So watch out for him tonight as he is number 13.
Yeah, clearly this Ridgewood Rebels team is a one-play wonder. Looks like to be per drive, as all of their receivers have very high receiving yards, low receptions, and it seems like they're only throwing it within the red zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Angelo Vital had definitely a weaker game against Clemente following their absolute crushing of Schurz, going 9 for 13, only 67 yards in that game as they killed the game off early and just resorted to running the ball. He had 3 touchdowns and 1 interception in that game, including 7 rush attempts for 22 yards.
Yeah, so something I obviously saw in that game was more pressure being brought onto Vital. He had to account for his feet more than his arm, which is something that we want to see. 7 attempts for 22 yards, that's not efficient at all to be a high school quarterback. And to keep him on the ground is one of the keys we need to do in this game.
Yeah, and then Frank Horak as well, averaging around 5 yards per carry in this game with 9 carries, 48 yards. Definitely less effective as well in this game. All the Ridgewood players seem to be on a downward trend currently, and we're hoping RB can continue this trend as they look to hopefully give Ridgewood a rude awakening.
Yeah, talk about downward trends. Luke Melendez, kind of stat padding, but in different positions here. He went 2 receptions, 35 yards. That was his whole game in the receiving corps. But then you get to the kick returns and the punt returns. 120 kick return yards. I believe he took one to the house as well. He had a massive play in that game. And he had 49 punt return yards.
Definitely a special teams merchant. Although, while he does seem to be stat padding, it is unquestionable that he is a raw athlete. He also plays basketball for Ridgewood as well. He's well known by many of the basketball players currently here at RB, including Danny Loftus, who may suit up tonight. We don't know.
Yeah.
As number 85. But continuing on, Alex Rabchek had 3 receptions for 17 yards and 1 singular touchdown in this game.
Yeah, actually going back to Luke Melendez for just a quick second, he just finished his first official visit to South Dakota University.
Wow. South Dakota State or South Dakota University?
Just South Dakota.
South Dakota, okay. So, because South Dakota State is a high-end upper echelon FCS school, but South Dakota probably is a notch down from that. Now we'll take a look at RB's schedule moving forward, as we hope that after this game, they can have a few wins that they can chalk off right now, as they start off playing Elgin away next week.
Yeah, Elgin is currently 0-2. They play the 2-0 West Aurora tonight. Everyone knows West Aurora is one of the stronger teams in the conference, and we kind of have marked down Elgin, will probably lose this game.
Yeah, it's probably one that they're not shaking up to be as good this year as they were last year, and that's not saying much considering they only went 1-9 last year. Fenton, on the other hand, that's who they play next week, is looking like a very much improved squad.
Yeah.
After a horrific 0-9 season last year, they are already off to a 2-0 start this year. They play Elmwood Park tonight, and it should be worth considering that this is the start of conference play for all Upstate East teams currently.
Yeah, let's move into the game let's move into Fenton. Fenton, you just talked about, they're 2-0, massive wins for them. They haven't really proven they could play in the Upstate 8 Conference. Obviously, we don't really know how good schools like Streamwood are.
Absolutely. Streamwood, maybe one of the weaker teams in terms of football. They are a huge school, but when it comes to football, not as much so. Same with Elgin. Once again, they actually beat Elgin 35-14 in what was probably an upset in week 1. Moving on to Glenbard South, this will be RB's next home game on October 4th.
Yeah, definitely an away stretch for the Bulldogs. They get 2 weeks away, then they head home. But it is against the Glenbard South team that should be pretty decent.
Yeah, absolutely. They're currently 1-1, although they did lose to a very good Wheaton-Warrenville South side before rinsing Aurora East 41-7. And they play 2-0 West Chicago tonight, which should be interesting considering we may owe West Chicago an apology. In the last broadcast, we mentioned how that should be an easy win for RB considering they went 5-5 last year. This year, though, already 2-0, it's a little scary. And it'll be an away trip for RB.
Yeah, we talked about West Chicago. We kind of hated on them for a good minute in our last pregame show. But obviously, we need to account for the games that aren't in the conference. We look at Ridgewood's games. They've played 2 Mickey Mouse football teams. We don't know that West Chicago has played anywhere near a good team, but obviously a good start for them.
Very, very. I'd be very happy if I was their coach. Someone I would not be happy for if I was the head coach is the Elmwood Park varsity squad, who is currently 0-2. That is who they play next week on October 11th. They lost to Chicago Christian. Chicago Christian was a punching bag for RB in years past in the former Metro Suburban Conference. That would probably be our senior night or our homecoming game if we still had it. But they lost 49-16, so they got absolutely crushed to them. And not a great sign for Elmwood.
Yeah, Elmwood actually plays Fenton tonight. Talked about them earlier, which, again, we can chalk up as a loss for Elmwood Park. They're not known for their football. They're not known to be a big school whatsoever. They have 971 students enrolled this year, which has clearly been playing a factor in their football program.
And going back to West Chicago, who they play on October 18th, that'll be an away game like we mentioned. They are completely reliant on their running game as they are led by senior running back Robert Lee. He's a menace who currently leads the Upstate 8 East Division in rushing yards.
I mean, this guy is a beast. He, against Round Lake, 10 rush attempts, 144 yards. That's 14.4 yards a carry.
Holy moly.
That is an outrageous stat line. And then you head into his next game. they gave him a little more carries, right? It worked in the first game. See if it works in the second game. And, I mean, it damn near did. 21 attempts for 293 yards against Joliet Central.
Holy cow. That is reminiscent of Aaron Stewart, the running back from Warren Township, who absolutely erupted in week 1. But that was actually against better opponents. Going into the final game for RB, which will be a dogfight. On the 25th of October, they face off against Glenbard East, who is currently 1-1. They won in a close 33-23 win against Willowbrook, followed by a 45-20 loss against a really good West Aurora team we mentioned earlier. This is a team that RB might have a tough time against.
Yeah, you account their loss. You look at West Aurora, they're known as one of the better top 30, top 25 teams in Illinois. So you can't even mark that off as a bad game for Glenbard East. And let's go to their last year in the Upstate 8 Conference. They went 8-1. That left them in first place of the conference. And outside of conference, they were 1-1, which proves that their outside of conference games are definitely harder than these Ridgewood teams are playing.
And this is exactly why tonight's game, their whole season, in fact, is predicated on the success of tonight's game. They need this win against Ridgewood at home so that they can have some assurance going into these tougher games, such as Glenbard East, such as Glenbard South at home, both of these games being home games. West Chicago, not an easy game either. This is why they need a win tonight. So, overall, tough schedule up ahead, but let's hope RB can knock out a win here tonight.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And with that, let's go into your Keohane's keys for success for tonight.
Yeah, of course. My first key for the game is to establish the offense early. Last week, a big loss, 31-9. That's not what we want to see out of the or 34-9, even worse. Not what we want to see out of the offense. Giancarlo's touchdown came late into the game. It wasn't even like we had a good start and let down. We had a terrible start and went a little uphill and went right back down. We cannot have this against a good Ridgewood offense. We can't let them get an early lead and make it a problem.
Absolutely. Hinsdale South had a very early start to the game in their favor. Mikey Jefferson ran for a 49-yard touchdown run to start the game off, absolutely taking some of our secondary in the process, followed by a Nicholas Akram dot from Langston Love that put him up 14-0 early. So that's something that we definitely need to do.
Yeah, for sure. And my second key to the game is to maintain a strong secondary. We have seen the stats on these receivers. We need to be strong. We need to press them at the line. We need to keep the ball out of their hands. Luke Melendez, like we talked about earlier, 6 receptions, 115 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the season. We know that when they're throwing the ball, they're looking for the end zone.
Absolutely. What's your next Keohane's key?
My key has got to work the run game. We've seen in our past 2 games, it has kind of been weak. Giancarlo is leading our team in rushing yards because our running backs haven't been able to get anything going. And that will be a big problem if we can't get them going.
Yeah, speaking on Giancarlo Garcia's rushing, he had 12 carries for 80 yards in that game last week with 6.7 yards per carry, including a 26-yard rushing touchdown when they were down earlier. So that's definitely something that needs to be ignited in this running back room here tonight.
Yeah, without a doubt. And now let's move on to my last key to the game. We need to pressure Vital, and we need to limit the pressure on Giancarlo Garcia. Vital doesn't throw much. We've seen that. He's only thrown 29 passes on the season. We need to make him panic like he did in that last game where he forced himself to run 7 times and only accounted for 22 yards, a little bit over 3 yards a carry, which is nowhere near efficient.
Yeah, you're completely right. When he did run, he had 8 carries for only 21 yards, averaging only 3 yards per carry. That's not good at all. They need to get him uncomfortable. They need him to make him scramble in the pocket. And that's all going to be up to Caleb McCautry, who may or may not be one of my picks for later on tonight.
Yeah, for sure. And my second half of my last key is to keep Giancarlo safe. You need to keep him comfortable in the pocket. This Ridgewood team accounts for some pretty big bodies
on
that D-line.
Yeah, and that'll be all up to Carter Shelby, and who's the captain of this offensive line. They're going to be coming up against some huge guys, such as defensive tackle Gil Mendoza, who is a senior, 6'5", 300 pounds. That is D1 Power 5 material, as well as defensive tackle Tommy Berkovich, who is only a sophomore. And get this, he is 6'4", 315 pounds. So the offensive line will have their work cut out for them tonight.
Yeah, it sounds like they have a bunch of Liam Cohens on the field. Yeah, no, I'm just joking. I'm no
maybe on the offensive line.
Yeah, maybe behind the center. in
Could be,
Vital, who stands in at 5'7".
Yeah, okay, yeah. Just getting that. Make sure that's clear. But with that, we'll actually segue to our on-the-field reporter, Madison Landon, who is standing right in front of us. Madison, what you got? Okay, actually, we're going to stand by for a second as we will get into a different – we're actually going to hold on as we stand for the national anthem.